Yokota is the most famous case out of many, many cases of abduction of citizens from countries like Japan, South Korea, and all over the world by North Korea in the 70s and 80s. And before I get into this further, I will do my usual disclaimer. This video mentions suicide, abduction, and other upsetting topics to do with true crime. If you do not want to listen, please click off now if you will find it upsetting or triggering. This video combines true crime and ASMR. Please click off if you don't like the combination. And I mean absolutely no disrespect to anyone affected by this case and the many cases within this case. My intent is only to raise awareness. So without further ado, Megumi Yokota, I thought I would just cover her, but that is basically impossible because to know about Megumi you have to go back into what happened to her and why and all the other cases. So I'm going to start with what sort of triggered my research, which was Megumi. So she was born on, and just sorry, another disclaimer, if I butcher any names because there's lots of names from many different countries, I sincerely apologise. I mean no disrespect. I'm English and don't speak any other languages, so I'm ignorant and I don't mean to do it on purpose. So Megumi was a 13-year-old girl at the time of this case who was born on the 5th of October in 1964 in Japan to Saki and Shigeru. She had younger twin brothers. She was abducted on the 15th of November 1977, aged 13, whilst walking home from badminton training at school in Niigata. It's Niigata, which is north of Tokyo in Japan. It's about an hour north. So the authorities were alerted and the police tried to track her scent and found, we're using police dogs, and found that the scent was lost on a street corner and she actually went missing only 300 metres from the sea. And her mother was absolutely devastated. I've seen her interviewed and it's really sad, and she was saying that she remembers looking into the sea or the river nearby and thinking of throwing herself in, but she said she wanted to keep going for her two other sons, her two other children, and to look for Megumi. She said she looked everywhere for her and she would run up to other girls in the street thinking it might be her, and her husband would try and stop her and say no it's not, but she was just so desperate to have her back, which is incredibly heartbreaking. So it took years for them to find out what had happened to Megumi, and in 1997 it came out that she had been kidnapped by North Korea. Now that sounds strange because you can't be kidnapped by a country, but basically people working for the North Korean regime abducted her. They abducted her where the scent was lost on the street, put her into a boat and sailed the boat. Well, it wouldn't be sailing, would it? It'd probably be like an electronic boat. Where she was abducted from, so the sea where she was abducted from is the closest point to North Korea. Well, there is 900 kilometres between that part of Japan and North Korea, which sounds far, but I guess so I'll try and be as clear as possible. So I've got a lot of this information from a documentary which I'll try and link below. And an hour south of North Korea, so 2 hours away from roughly from where Megumi was kidnapped, there was a house that was owned by a North Korean doctor living in Japan, and he died about 10 years ago, roughly, or 15 years ago. And it was not like the most like the house was fine, but they had a garden which actually went down to sea, and it was down a sort of cliff, like such a small cliff, and the garden was totally not looked after. It obviously wasn't used as a garden, and it was very closed off, and there was a path that went down to the sea, and there you can see, basically they think that people were kept here initially and then driven off in boats to North Korea. And this part of the documentary is basically a man whose brother was taken and was kept there before being driven off to North Korea in a boat, knows all this, and this has come out over time. His brother is still alive, but he can't contact him, and it's kind of thought that maybe this is another place where people were taken from Japan, so other citizens were kept just before they were taken to North Korea. So several Japanese citizens were taken there by force from a private beach where at the bottom of the house. So on the 21st of December 2001, so 4 years after it came out that Megumi had been kidnapped, the Japanese Coast Guard chases a North Korean boat, and there's actually footage of this, and they're constantly asking the boat to stop. They're not trying to take it down, they just want it to stop, and the boat refuses, and they respond back by basically you can see them trying to get rid of all the evidence on whatever's on the ship. And then the boat, they finally have to shoot the boat down, and they're responded with shots. So basically the North Korean Coast Guard stops the boat, and the Japanese Coast Guard stops the boat, and the North Koreans shoot at them rather than going peacefully, and they're forced to sort of take the boat out, and it sinks, and all 15 North Korean crew members die, unfortunately. So basically, in 2002, the boat, that was right at the end of 2001, and then in 2002 the boat was brought up from the seabed, and it came with a plethora of information and evidence, and it had all the guns and things and lots of information that helps them sort of get more information about this case. And this is kind of the things that they were doing, North Koreans. There was a spy who knew about this, who said he was part of the Storm Unit, and they took an oath, so the people on this boat will have done the same. And basically the oath was, my life doesn't really matter anymore, all that matters is North Korea and keeping up the regime. So it's kind of like brainwashing, and that's what all the men will have been thinking on this boat, and that's why they were willing to die rather than give themselves up. In 2002, the Japanese Prime Minister at the time met with the leader of North Korea, who I think was Kim Jong-il. Sorry if I've said that wrong. The North Korean leader admitted to the kidnappings, and 1 month later freed 5. So he admitted to 17 kidnappings. He freed 5 after 25 years, but said the other 12 had died. And they provided death certificates for the other 12. One of them was Megumi Yokota, and it said that she had died by suicide in 1993. And the other ones were various, so there was accidents, poisoning I think was one of them, but there was kind of they weren't really believed, so it was noticed that all the death certificates, even though they were supposed to be at various times and they would be at various places, cases all came from the same hospital, which is strange, really. I mean, North Korea's a big place and there are lots of hospitals, so that's dodgy. All the stamps, if you put them on top of each other, all the stamps were in exactly the same place, and it was thought that they may have taken real death certificates of different people and then just put the names of the other 12 people on the death certificates, and that some of them weren't actually dead, or if they were, they might have died by other means. So there would be Japanese families and some police were very suspicious of this. Megumi's ashes were returned to her family, but there was a DNA test, and the DNA test did not match a sample taken from Megumi when she was a teenager. However, there have been disputes around this, like how much you can believe, because apparently the person who did the DNA test was quite new in his career, and they should have used someone more expert, and there were a few other issues, so that doesn't conclusively mean that they definitely gave the wrong remains, but it does seem unlikely that Megumi's remains, they were Megumi's remains just based on all the other evidence. But so the families were, and including Megumi's, were hoping that they were still alive. So one proof of evidence that they think this shows this is someone that knew her was someone that was liberated. So Hitomi Soga was taken in 1978 with her mother when she was just 19 years old, and when she was taken, she ended up marrying a man in North Korea called Chris Jenkins. Now, Chris Jenkins is American, as you probably thought, at least he was Western by his name. He was serving in the army and he deserted and fled to North Korea rather than fight in the war. And as a result, he was kind of taken as a prisoner as part of the regime as well. He was forced to, so the first few years, he was forced to just study and learn the language, and they would be punished by making them sit in really uncomfortable positions for hours and hours. And after that, he was then recruited as kind of an actor. He played the bad American, so the evil American, in a lot of North Korean propaganda movies, and he did show clips of this on the documentary. He was there for 39 years, and his wife Hitomi Soga was released in 1978, and he was released 2 years later after 39 years in North Korea with their 2 daughters. So they now live on an island in Japan, I think one of the Japanese islands, and he is scared to go out even at night and things. He's become an attraction there, so people specifically go to visit him to have their picture taken with him, but he still thinks something bad is going to happen to him. And he was saying that the North Korean people promised him a wife while he was there, and they gave him a Hitomi Soga, and that's how they met. So they met as part of the regime as 2 kind of prisoners. He said that while he was there, he was asked to study for up to 17 hours a day their ideology and the regime, and he was inflicted with punishment, like I said earlier, so he didn't have a pleasant time at all, and he says now is the happiest time in his life. Now he's free. But yeah, he's still scared to go out at night as he thinks something bad is going to happen to him. So they started to look into potentially other victims and other people that had been abducted. So obviously there was these 17, but it was believed and widely sort of in a way proven by the testimonials of the 5 people returned, so I think a month later, but they kept 5 people. So they decided to keep 5 of them. I'm not sure exactly why these specific 5 people. And there's a guy on it who talks about his father being one of them, and he thinks he will have been forced to be like a prisoner, part of the regime, or killed if he decided not to be part of it. 3,800 South Koreans have been kidnapped by North Korea since the end of the Cold War. And they've got evidence of other ethnicities and citizenships being kidnapped. So there was a Thai citizen a woman called Anucha, who was kidnapped in 1978, and that was proven. There was a Romanian citizen called Doina Bumbaya, who was abducted. Now, she was studying in Rome, and her friend says they think someone had promised her an art exhibition in Tokyo, and she'd flown to Tokyo, and she called her friends saying, I've got this art exhibition in Tokyo, I'll tell you about it soon. And she was probably abducted from there. So that's a Romanian citizen. Her brother and mother only found out that she'd been abducted in 2002 when the American Chris Jenkins wrote a book, because she was his neighbour and they used to talk quite a lot, and he said that Doina, I think it's called Doina, used to say, just you wait, we're going to be liberated, and yes, we'll still be living in North Korea, but it will just be like a capitalist society. And he sort of laughed warmly at the memory, thinking it would have been nice, but that's obviously never happened. She died in 1997 of lung cancer, and like I said, her brother and mother didn't find out till 5 years later that she'd even been abducted by North Korea when they read Chris Jenkins' book where she was mentioned. Many Europeans have been captured, and as well as Japanese and North Koreans, and basically the reason for all these abductions is so that they can teach the North Koreans the languages and customs of these different nationalities like Japanese and South Korean and all these different countries, and I guess in a way it's trying to so they can learn more about their enemies and be infiltrated. 4 Lebanese women were captured in 1979 but freed in 1980. They were captured and taken to a North Korean military base, and they said while they were there they saw 28 other women of different nationalities such as Italian, French and Dutch. There are records of German, Chinese and Czech factory workers and housewives, etc., still living in North Korea that were abducted. There was more evidence is there's a reformed terrorist called Kim Hon Hee, sorry if I've said that wrong, who is a woman who was, like I say, she's reformed. She blew up an aeroplane in I'm not sure what year actually, I've not written it, but quite a long time before this, and 115 people died. And she says she remembers thinking that, she's sort of thinking about the victims and their families, but genuinely believing that what she was doing was the right thing. She'd been told it was the best way to unify North Korea and South Korea, and she was doing the best thing for her nation, and she had been completely brainwashed basically. And so she was now reformed, and she is now constantly, she doesn't go info on her kidnap was disclosed over the phone in 1997 to her parents. So she was kidnapped to teach them the customs of like the Japanese people. She was taught the Korean language and forced to help train Korean spies to be Japanese. So that was the whole point basically. So it was said that she married a man who was also kidnapped from Japan called Kim Young Nam in 1986, and they had a daughter in 1987 who is called Kim Yeon Gyong. Sorry if I'm pronouncing these names wrong. The husband of Megumi was allowed to see his family briefly in 2006, so they flew to see him. He confirmed to them that she had died by suicide in either 93 or 94, but his parents didn't believe him because they said it was like he was reading from a script and he was being watched, so they think he was just told what to say, so they said they wouldn't take that as evidence that she had died by suicide, although she is earlier. They said that she had had mental illness and had made several attempts to commit suicide before being successful. But then in June 2012, documents were recovered that said she died of depression, which isn't a thing, but obviously that's the way of saying suicide, on the 14th of December 2004, so 10 years after they initially said. So all these conflicting documents, and that's why the parents I still think she might be alive or are unsure. And there were rumours that a woman had been found who had the same birth date as her and a similar name, and she was being kept under the protection of Kim Young's sister who works with him in politics. But it turned out that that was probably her daughter who was born in 1987, so Kim Yeon Gyong, and they think she was keeping her close by. They were keeping her close by to, because she's quite high in like types of propaganda, and they can use her to get more information in future is kind of what they think. So in March 2014, Shigeru and Saki, Megumi's parents, met their granddaughter Kim Yeon Gyong in I think she'll have been about 24 at this point or something, 25, and she also had a daughter, so they met their daughter and their granddaughter and their great granddaughter, which I'm glad they got to meet them, but I'm not sure what happened after. Like, I assume she was made to go back to North Korea, so that's really sad. I don't know whether that's what she wanted or if she could even say anything about her mother. Donald Trump, President of the United States, if you've been living under a rock, mentioned Megumi Yokota in a speech in 2017 saying, he knows that they stole her and blah blah blah, and the parents actually thanked him for mentioning it because they think it raised more awareness. Unfortunately, Shigeru, Megumi's father, died on the 5th of June 2020, so only 2 months ago, and it was said that Trump actually sent his condolences to Saki, the wife. So that's all the information I have found. I mean, there's a lot of information out there, but that's kind of the best way I could think to condense it down and tell you. So lots and lots of people have been affected by this, and it's incredible that I've never even heard of it. Let me know if you've heard of it and if I've missed anything. And I really hope that they find out for sure what happened to Megumi one day, and if she is still alive, I hope she gets to see her mother, because I saw a speech by her mother saying all she wants is just to see her for a second or a word. That's all she wants, and I really hope she does get to do that, because it's devastating if not. Please let me know if I've missed anything. If you know about this case, leave it in the comments below. There's a lot of stuff to cover, so I definitely will have. I really apologise for butchering names. Like I say, I'm an ignorant English person. I don't know how to pronounce a lot